So a couple weeks ago, just before Christmas, that's not a couple weeks ago, many weeks ago, when I was doing my grocery shopping just before Christmas, in Lidl, I came across this very interesting book called The Universe. I think it's Constellations, Planets, Galaxies. Yes, I got it right. I thought it was intriguing because I haven't really read many kids' books on space. Now that my time has just been taken up with, actual papers on stuff, I haven't been able to revisit the stuff that kids get taught. And so I thought it would be fun to flick through it in the aisle and just see what kind of things, kids learn about. So yeah, in the aisle I decided to have a flick through and sort of see what kind of things kids get taught, because one really big thing about my channel is that I tend to don't mean to toot my own horn, but I tend to cover a lot of high-level stuff in my day-to-day during my PhD, and sometimes it's really important to remember sort of what the level of knowledge that the public has, and in particular what level of knowledge kids have as they're growing up and trying to learn a little bit more. What kind of things do they get taught, and what is the correct sort of level for them? So I figured, I just have a look at a couple pages. Maybe if it's really good, I might purchase it. Evidently I did, but not because it was really good. So the first page I flipped onto was Galaxies, the starting chapter for Galaxies. And of course we've got the lovely picture of ARP 273 over here, which is probably one of my favourite galaxies of all time. So I was reading through the start of the chapter and I noticed something very interesting. Galaxies, the name comes from galaxis, the Greek word for milk, are grouped according to their shapes. So morphological classification, that's pretty correct. There are elliptical, barred, irregular, or spiral galaxies. Now, I don't know about you, but what I'm assuming they're trying to say is that we're talking about the four main types, but those are not the four main types of galaxies that we have. I mean, 3 out of 4 are correct, mind you, but barred galaxies aren't necessarily a parent group on their own. It's usually lenticulars, which are gas-poor spiral. Well, they're not spirals. If they're gas-poor, they can't make spirals, but they're a group on their own, which haven't really been included here. So I thought that was a little bit interesting. I thought it's not really a big deal, really. I mean, galaxy classification is super subjective just on its own, and I'm not going to be all that pedantic about something like that, even though I've probably talked about it for a minute already. But anyways, I continued reading on, and I saw that the next sentence, well, a couple of sentences after this, they say galaxies revolve around a common central point. One revolution of the Milky Way takes about 230 million years. However, such conglomerations of stars are not isolated in space. And this is when I started to get even a little bit more concerned, because last time I checked, I don't think kids know what conglomerations are, or if they can even spell that. So I thought that's a little bit of a fancy word for a kid's book on space and galaxies and the universe. So I decided to flick through it a little bit more, and I started getting a bit more disappointed, let's say. As you can see, I've got quite a few notes. The reason this kind of thing irks me, it doesn't necessarily make me super mad or angry, these things happen, but my main disappointment in this kind of stuff is the fact that I think of all things, kids' books should really, really be, the most well-crafted and most tailored of all books. Mainly because, this is a really developmental stage in a kid's life where they're absorbing a lot of information. And when you're learning such sort of basics, and I don't mean basic as in simple things necessarily, I mean like the fundamentals of things, unlearning misinformation or disinformation in some topics is extremely difficult, and it can set a child up for failure later on in life. Now, granted, with astrophysics, this isn't really as big a problem as, say, other things, but one thing I did notice when I was looking at the aisle is that, of course, this wasn't the only book in this series. There was a couple books, and some of which were things like the human body or like the atmosphere of the Earth. And these things, I think, are a lot more important to make sure that kids are learning the right stuff. Even if it is maybe simplifications of things, it shouldn't be incorrect. But anyway, my point is, kids' books, I think we should be paying a lot more attention to when it comes to the editing and the, you know, the polishing up of any drafts or the book, just the writing itself. I think a lot more care and attention should be put into these, mainly because, you know, this is just such an important part of a human's like learning and education. I really do think we should pay a lot more attention to it. And this book kind of highlighted that to me, and I guess sort of made me realise the importance of it just a little bit more. So yeah, I had quite a few notes. I think my first one was that instead of cosmology, they wrote the words cosmogony, which I'm not exactly sure that that's the right word that they should have been using. I mean, their definition of it was correct, but in general, I think when it comes to astrophysics, a lot of people refer to themselves as cosmologists, or they work in the field of cosmology. Cosmogony tends to be a little bit more on the philosophical side, and in a lot of ways it tends to go into pseudoscience as well, so it's a bit like flat earth. A lot of things on the internet regarding cosmogony are, so I'd be very, very wary of putting that in a kid's book. But that was the first point that I saw when I looked at chapter 1, and this was when alarm bells started ringing for me, and that was when I decided to purchase the book and read over it and make a lot of detailed notes. The next thing I very quickly noticed when turning onto the next page, which is just on the universe, is that they get a lot of names, and I mean actual nouns, wrong, and this is kind of consistent throughout the book as well. So for example, you have the Magellanic Clouds, which is plural because you have the Large Magellanic Cloud and then the Small Magellanic Cloud. However, here we have actually called it the Magellan Cloud. I believe that was singular as well. Let's see where this is on the book. Yes, I was correct. They refer to it as the Magellan Cloud, which is just incorrect in general. I don't really know where they got this name from, but yeah, the the Magellanic Clouds just aren't referred to that at all. I'm really confused as to where they did that, but my point being, the name is actually just wrong, full stop. And I did try and search up what this Magellan Cloud is, but I couldn't find anything because it's just wrong. And I don't think you should be putting that in a kid's book. The next problem I had with the book is that the chapters are wrong. And this is an editing thing as opposed to an actual, like, information is wrong here. Because clearly what's happened is, within the first draft, they had some different chaptering, some different names, and in the second draft things have been moved around before it got published, and some things just didn't go checked. So for example, here it had the final chapter of the solar system is called Earthborn, which I don't really know what that means. But if you go later on to where those pages are, that chapter doesn't exist anymore. So things like editing, you know, once again, kind of should be polishing up your work and checking it a lot more thoroughly than this. Okay, this one had quite a few things. Now, this is where I kind of realised that what has happened with this book is that the information was clearly in another language like German, and then it had been translated into English by somebody who clearly didn't have experience in both space science and linguistics to a good degree. I don't want to like hate on this person that much, but thankfully my vids don't get enough traction and virality for them to like figure this out, so that's fine. But yeah, so for example, I think here it says it's supposed to continue, referring to the sun, for another 5,000 million years. However, in English, that is not correct. It is 5 billion years. So this is basically where I was like, this is clearly a translation error. Also, some of the wording is a little bit too vague to actually convey useful information. So, for example, they say, oh my goodness, I didn't realise this one. It says that the sun produces energy. It doesn't. You can't create it or destroy it. You can only transfer it and convert it. So they basically just committed a holy sin of astrophysics. That's pretty bad. I don't think that would be maybe it was no, that's terrible. You can't do that. You can't tell a kid that. Okay. But anyways, that aside, one thing that they did mention, well, when I mentioned the vagueness of their wording, when I was reading through this part on the sun, it sort of was implied to me that the presence of the sun itself is what creates seasons, which, I mean, is technically correct. If we didn't have a sun, we wouldn't have any seasons, any life, anything at all. Even the Earth wouldn't exist. But I don't think that's what they were trying to say. I think what they were trying to say is that our orbit around the sun is how we get our seasons and stuff. But the way that it was worded, it made it sound like just the sun being specifically the sun, the presence of it there, is what creates the seasons, which is kind of correct, but also kind of incorrect. It's just a bit too vague, if you get what I'm saying. Here I wrote we had bad formatting of pictures. So some of these pictures, like over here, refer to things that were in the previous page. Now, I can't actually complain about that too much, because if you've read any papers on like galaxies and galactic dynamics, you know that these people do not like to put their pictures in the right areas. It's a nightmare. So I'm not going to go too harsh on them for that. Although one thing I did like here is that we actually do have actual pictures of, you know, the sun, and like I'm guessing those are coronal mass ejections here. Yeah, so you do actually get real pictures, which you can't say the same for the rest of the book, but here it's a really nice addition, and I think, you know, it was a good thing to do. Since time immemorial, human beings have been both fascinated and frightened by comets. I don't know any 10-year-old that would understand what time immemorial means. You know, I just don't think that might be appropriate for a kid's book. Although, to be honest, there's not much that says that it's meant to be. Oh no, it says for children from the age of 10. No, it is a kid's book. Yeah, I just don't think that's the right kind of phrase to use for a kid's book. Okay, I'm going to have to ask my friend on this, because they are the comet expert here. But here it says that the comets are dirty snowballs, and I'm trying to remember if that's correct or if they're snowy dirt balls, because it's one or the other. And I have a feeling that they've got it wrong here. Now we're back onto the galaxies section. The first thing that they mention is the word galaxy comes from the Greek made up of gala, milk, and cyclos or kyklos, meaning cycle, and that isn't correct. Kyklos means circle as opposed to cycle, so that's technically wrong. The reason I know that is because my supervisor, for the first chapter of his thesis, decided to have an etymology lesson on where the word Milky Way comes from. As you do. Another thing that I was really intrigued by with this book is that they do have a couple very high quality images. A lot of images that we take, you know, with NASA, ESA, you know, the Hubble Space Telescope, they are in the public domain, or you only need to really credit them properly to be able to use and share them. That being said, a lot of, you know, when I use them on my website and on my channel, this is all free stuff. I'm not exactly selling you a product that has this image. So maybe it is different when it comes to actually publishing and selling a book. However, a lot of these images are just very questionable. So for example, here on this page, basically what we're looking at is the core of a galaxy with its bar, and then I'm guessing these are spiral arms as well, but this just doesn't look anything like reality at all. And clearly they've like created this very quickly through, I don't know what kind of software we use to actually create images like this, but I don't think it does the topic at hand justice, if you get what I mean. We have these really nice images over here of a spiral galaxy, so you can see the core here quite well. You can also see the spiral arms really well. But yeah, it's just very weird, you know, the pictures just don't feel right. Right, the next thing was that we talk about galaxy classifications, and of course I've already made a video on this. It is very confusing, I get it. And there are actually many different ways to actually classify galaxies and subclassify them. But at the same time, you can't mishmash different classification systems when you're so blatantly wrong. Like, for example, elliptical galaxies are broken down into subgroups E0 to E7. Yes and no. We're talking about two different systems here. One system goes from E1 to E7, E1 to E7, and then another system goes from E0 to E6. So, do you get what I'm saying here? I'm losing the words. Also, when you try and simplify things down, you end up sometimes removing extremely crucial information that could, in some cases, it would make what you're saying completely incorrect. But in some cases, it's only really just telling half the story, and you just have to be very careful with what you are prioritizing and what you are disregarding. So, for example, for the spiral galaxy classification, if you remember from my video, I mentioned that we usually tend to classify them based on the tightness and definition of the arms. So you get SA, SAB, SB, SBC, SC, SCD, SD. So you have A, B, C, D, but then you have these intermediate classifications as well, these intermediate classes. But here they have completely scrubbed that part of the classification system, which technically makes it incorrect. And it's a real shame here, because you could have taught a kid quite an advanced topic. Galaxy classification, we didn't cover this until undergrad level, which admittedly it is a lot simpler than it sounds. But this could have been a really good teaching moment, and you removed enough information to make what you're saying kind of incorrect, which is a real shame. Oh yeah, another thing that I noted was that some of these images, yes, you've got some labels on specific parts of what's in the image, but you don't actually have any captions or descriptions for the image. You haven't really got much of an explanation, which I don't think is good for a kid's book, in my opinion, especially if they don't know what's going on. Also, the irregular galaxies, the classification that they talk about is... I have no clue what they were actually talking about. It seems more like the Type 1 and Type 2 classes of supernovae, but they turned it into a regular galaxy. I really don't know what they are talking about here, so I will not go into it in much detail. They do sort of mention Bard's classification of population 2 stars just out of nowhere. I don't think they'll know what a population 2 star is. But yeah, I feel like introducing a concept like that just out of nowhere and then not explaining it isn't really good for a kid's book, or just for something at a kid's level. Oh, this one got me really annoyed. So here we've got the topic of quasars over here. And so we've also got a very interesting image of a quasar, but they call it... A quasar is the word created by Professor Chu of Columbia University. It is the abbreviation of quasi-stellar radio waves. That's incorrect, just straight up incorrect. It's a quasi-stellar radio source. Why would it just be radio waves? It doesn't make sense. If you're talking about an object, why would you be referring to radio waves, right? I don't know. Although they do mention a couple really, really nice key quasars, which I really like. For example, 3C273 is, a pretty cool quasar that we'd have pretty interesting images of. None of those feature in this book, but I have to admit, one really good thing about these is that they've used some really high quality Hubble Space Telescope images where they could. So, for example, these are the pillars of creation, aren't they? I can't even remember now, but the actual picture here is really detailed and really nice. Same thing with ARP 273. They're really stunning. So if anything, you could just look at the pretty pictures. You could cut them out and frame them, maybe. I think they're really good, really high quality. I mean, the paper's high quality, so definitely frame-worthy. Now here my notes actually get quite sparse from here on. We're talking about stars, their development. In general, I kind of skimmed through most of this section, so I didn't make any very detailed notes. But the only thing that I wanted to say is that they spelt Hertzsprung-Russell diagram wrong. Okay, this was one more point that I had. With regards to the level of English not being appropriate for a 10-year-old, this is the section on white dwarfs, and here's what the first paragraph says. A white dwarf is one possible culmination of the existence of a star. I don't know if does a 10-year-old know what the word culmination means? I definitely didn't, and I have to admit, I was a very stupid child. But, I don't know, maybe kids are cleverer than they used to be. But yeah, I don't think that's maybe the best way to say that some small stars end up as white dwarfs at the end of their life. I don't know. I'm just throwing that one out there. Maybe that would be a better sentence, maybe not. I don't know. But no, I wouldn't use the word culmination. Finally, at the end of the book, you have a glossary, which I think is really good addition to have with a kid's book. It would be nice, I think, if you could go and refer to this glossary in, whilst you're in the book. But from what I could see, there wasn't really any sort of way of doing that. They didn't refer back to any sort of terms at the back of the book. But that aside, I think it's a really good addition. And in general, you should include that in a kid's book for basically any scientific topic, because you come across a lot of new words, such as conglomeration or culmination, but specific to astrophysics. The only thing that I wanted to say about this is that in general, a lot of these words and their descriptions are correct. However, there are a certain few that were a little bit concerning, and that was supermassive black hole is incorrectly referred to as a super heavy black hole. And it's not even here, it's on the other page. There we go. Super heavy black hole, and we don't refer to them as super heavy black holes in English. They also include the word spaghettification, and I'm not gonna lie, I do love that. In general, the kind of words that they cover here in the glossary is actually quite broad, and I do think it covers a lot of what's been covered in the main body of the book, so I can't really complain about that. One thing that was quite nice is that I did also learn a couple new words here, some things that we don't really use in modern astrophysics, keyword modern, but yeah, it was kind of interesting learning a bit more vocabulary myself. Yeah, and then at the end, one thing that I am very happy that they did is they did also give picture credits by the page, which I think is of course key and probably avoids a couple legal problems. But yeah, that was good at least. I would have preferred that they would put credits under the pictures, like the way that I do in most of my videos and all of my articles that I write. I always put the credit with the picture to avoid confusion. There are only a couple cases where that's not appropriate. But yeah, that would have been a better idea. But yeah, I'm conflicted, really. I'm really conflicted with this, because you had the basics, like the fundamentals of, a really good idea, a good book, but there's so much misinformation or mistranslations in it that you've kind of you've not actually made a good book, it's not, you were so close and yet so far at the same time. But I don't know, I felt kind of upset at the time, because I do think children deserve good books, really like good information that can be conveyed to them at the right level and help them grow and develop their interests and, and advance their education. But clearly I don't think this book really can do that because of all of these problems. And I know at times I'm being a bit nitpicky, but I think that's important for a kid's book. I feel like for kids' books of all, you should be extremely nitpicky with the way that you word things and present things as well. In the case of diagrams or illustrations, it was just, I don't know, I just felt a bit disappointed. I guess, yeah, I think I did allude to this earlier in the introduction, but my main concern isn't necessarily that they don't know what a lenticular galaxy is, or they get something wrong about, I don't know, the spelling of Hertzsprung-Russell. It's more so the fact that there are other books on things that I'm not well versed in, such as the human body, and if there's misinformation on the human anatomy, that's a lot more worrying, especially with regards to, women's health, if there's something wrong there, or, developmental stuff or disabilities. It can have a detrimental effect on the way somebody perceives somebody with that kind of condition. And I don't know, I can't tackle a book like that because I just don't know enough about the human body or MSK or any of that at all to be able to make a good review on it. But one book that I can make a good review on is about the universe, so this was the one that I picked. They also did have some on specifically the Earth, so like the atmosphere and the climate and like the core, which is all very cool as well, but I once again don't know enough about it to make a really good review. But yeah, I think my point still stands. If there's worries with one book, there are definitely problems with the other ones as well. But yeah, I'm I'm absolutely knackered right now. I have been talking for quite a while and I've just been travelling to and from... I just travelled back from a hospital appointment and I think that zapped all of my energy. But yeah, on a positive note, I hope you guys like my sweater. It's the Spiral sweater by Veidis Jónsdóttir. It is made with Letlopi, and the reason I made it is because it has lots of lovely spirals that sort of remind me of the phase spiral within the Milky Way, and so that was the main sort of motivation for making this. And I absolutely love it and want to show it off as much as possible, so I hope you like the sweater as well. But anyways, that concludes this video. I shall see you soon with another video on something. Yeah, see you later.